Okay. So my name is Andrew Welchel from Savient, and I'll have more information about me here in a little bit, but I'll focus on this session. The session, as you can see from the title, if you've happened to read any things ahead of time, it's really about two key things. One is about speed of access for the mission, for data analytics and AI, but also more importantly, you'll see the more details on it is about identity security and really doing that at the edge. And so how to do that. Hold on a second. There we go. Get the right ones in the right hand. Note on the agenda, three quick things we'll focus on. I'll have a little bit of notes on the challenge as we have it. We'll also have a little bit of step into the solution approach, and then we'll have a step into the technical use case and the example architecture at the end. Time permitting, we'll have a demo video to show. If there's not time, that's totally okay. I want to make sure I leave time for questions. And then if not, I'll have a graphic available. You can actually pull the demo video as well to yourself. If you have questions too, we'll be at 7:07. You can actually see the demo video up there as well. So I want to make sure we leave time for questions for you guys. So the first thing to note is, this is kind of obvious, but things have changed. And the things that we kind of make sure we mention things have changed. It used to be that when you would take mission assets, they would let things be very physical assets, hardware-based assets. Things changed where there is more software, but things that have changed now is just like the data center has altered to have virtualization, we experience that exact same thing on mission assets. So very specifically, we're talking about software-defined mission assets that are happening. So this now changes the questions and parameters, or really adds to it. So we not only have to make sure that the systems themselves are tested and secure, but we have to answer these questions about who has access, who are the users that have access, and also how do they authenticate and how do you authorize and get them to these systems. These are certainly technical challenges we definitely have to address, because really if you don't address it, it's going to slow down the mission, and definitely no one wants that. If we look a slightly level deeper and kind of look at this new high-risk environment, there are a few key elements that are really different that we have to be able to address. The first of these is really how do you rapidly onboard users to these mission sets, because they're really seeing the kind of the combination of episodic and enduring scenarios. We want to make sure we can get people on very quickly when it's time. The other key thing kind of goes along with that is how do you get people out, because when it's time for a task or operation is done, you don't need those people in this system. We need to get them out and get them rotated to the next thing. The other thing that was talked about even in the previous session and some others is about how do you operate in this multi-domain, multi-mission partner environment. As we start to combine those things, as you can imagine, the surface area specifically for identity starts to expand. Not a bad thing, but it's certainly something we have to manage risk for. The last thing just to add to that is this whole concept of AI and machine learning. All these elements, it's good for us. Unfortunately, it's good for everyone else as well. It may or may not be a surprise, but the bad guys are using this as a tool as well for that. So we definitely have to accommodate for that risk. Now, something changes as well. When we talk about software-defined mission assets, all of a sudden we need to have this opportunity or challenge, rather, to do things out in the field. Now, when we do that, we have new challenges we also have to meet. We also have to meet that from the standpoint when we are ready to push out these capabilities, compute, AI, machine learning out in the field at the edge. We need now to have the ability, what happens when comms go down, right? We have to ask this question, what are we going to do? How are you going to support that? And because we can't just stop working. The mission keeps going on. We got to support that and be successful. The second really key item here is also about how do we support mobile scenario? And why don't we just mean mobile like, hey, I have my mobile phone with me, but also really how do you become mobile from a maneuver warfare? How do you shut down things, move, operate with deception concepts, et cetera? Because really it has to be one integrated flow as that all operates. So really have to solve not just one thing, but really everything. But we have a path for that. That's the good news. And so the path, if you've heard of Zero Trust, you're going to hear it again today. But if you delve one level deeper on Zero Trust, there's not just MFA, but there's also this concept called Zero Standing Privilege. And Zero Standing Privilege is the authorization side of Zero Trust. And it kind of harps on that kind of concept to say, hey, when you need access, you shouldn't have access before you need it, but when you're done, you don't need to have any access anymore. You need to be brought back to whatever the new thing is. So how this visually comes out is if you look at the kind of the cloud approach, you'll see it looks very similar in a sense, right? The cloud approach is we have the capabilities, we have the assets, but for every set of assets, there's a representative set of accounts and entitlements. We'll call them Alpha, Bravo, Charlie for levels of access. We just mirror that when we talk about the field and the edge. So all we're doing is the exact same thing. All these things, SharePoint, data products, et cetera, all these have accounts that will represent a person or even NPEs. And then also you'll have levels of access. So the big question is, how do we manage that? How do you know what you have? How do you know what's assigned to people? And then how do you process that? Well, the first step is to have the capacity and the capabilities to do that. So how we do that is a zero standing privilege capacity solution. In this case, it's Savient. So how that actually operates from a plumbing perspective is we have policies, and we have that operate in two ways. One, it's basically ABAC policies. And then two, it's also a requestable policy. You say, hey, I got deployed, I'm out here, and now someone will request on my behalf. But the way that flows is, initially, we got to know who the person is, so they may get automatically accessed or automatically given access based off an attribute. But then the second part is they may need to also get approval for it. So at the end of the day, the mission owner of the asset, or the asset mission owner, these things come from the catalog, C3T, et cetera. They got to own and know what this risk is, and when it's there, the great thing is this is a blending so that people cannot get access quickly, but at the same time you can manage and know what that risk is and manage that for it. And when I say manage that risk, it's also about being able to pull that stuff back out when the time is right. Now, the great thing about some of this stuff is we're not just talking about something that's kind of bleeding edge and we're trying to ask for people to deploy the first time. This is actually an approach for at least part of it that's already being deployed at an Army Futures Command. This is just a visual representation of some of the capabilities. So essentially what we're talking about when we pivot from, hey, an overall approach to a delivery capability, we're talking about something that is in place for at least half of it already today. And then we just have to answer the question, well, what do we do for the other half? What do we do for the portion that enables us to bring in redirection to a different authentication source when you can't get access to comms? And then how do you make sure you can get access to those resources? So then our overall solution approach is really to take everything we already did, we're doing today. Yeah, make sure I'm in the right place. Everything we're doing today, and basically wrap in. Let me go back one. There we go. Everything we're doing today, and we wrap in those last pieces. Those last pieces of the puzzle is to answer the question of how do I go to an alternate authentication source when the comms go down, and then how do I actually make sure, clean up, and provide the tooling so I have cyber assurance when it's time to go back to the system. So in this case, what we're doing is we're combining a known entity that's already in at Army Futures Command, which is the authorization part that's at the top. We're providing an orchestration component, which is the strata part in the middle, and then we're extending this with a key cloak, which is an IDP at the bottom. So the bottom part is certainly flexible, but certainly the two middle parts, or the middle and the top part, are key fundamental parts of this. And the part that cannot be forgotten at all is definitely the Microsoft intertwining. So certainly Entra ID is a big part of Army A365 as an example. But the other part, you got to ask the question, well, what exactly are we going to put this on? And so the answer we came to is makes a whole lot of sense for us is Azure Stack in this case. The nice thing is because it's a known quantity, it's already gotten accredited and those type of things. And from our part, just from a product perspective, we're already built to run on Azure, so it makes a lot of sense. But the nice thing is once everything's on there, it becomes a capability that you can take with you. We give the variety of delivery methods and mission sets in that particular use case. Now, the next thing you may be wondering is, okay, I can get on a box, that's great, but what do I actually do with it, and what does this user experience look like? And that's what we get to here. So the next kind of question of this is, what does this user experience look like for the user? Because if you really start to think about it, these are guys who are not in the data center, but they're in the field, and their mission is not the data center. Their mission is the mission there in the field. So it's got to be secure, it's got to be reliable, and certainly it's got to be easy to use, right? It cannot interfere with the mission. So in this particular case, we maintain to those principles, and the first step here is we make sure that users are getting provision to access as soon as it gets to the field. So as soon as it gets there, connections are made, and as soon as that happens, the user then has access to all the accounts they'll need to do the rollover when that time has come. The next step is, from the user experience, is then to make the request. You see the first number one. The second is it gets picked up by the orchestration component, number 2. And number 3 is automatically based off how it's known to come back. If it's connected, it'll come back from Entra. If it's disconnected, it'll come back from KeyCloak in this particular case. And then once it's done, the user will get access, and then they'll simply access the application. After you get here, the application could also be SharePoint or something else as well. The last little technical note I give is the flexibility to hit all the applications as you would expect. It's probably known that if you're disconnected, you're probably not going to access some applications, but we want to make sure that the applications that are local, that you can definitely get to those. So in this particular case, you can definitely see that as that connection breaks, yes, you may not be able to access Azure or a few applications there, but you know what? SharePoint, SQL Server, all those applications are definitely still in play. So a few notes on outcomes, and we might briefly have a chance to let you see a quick video of an operation. 4 quick things. Mission ready. So as soon as it ships, it's ready to connect and start using because it'll automatically start provisioning. MFA built into the solution. You can continue to use your CAC. You can continue to use the YubiKeys, whatever MFA preference. Cyber assurance tools are part of this so that you know that as soon as it's ready to connect, you have a safe and ready environment to bring back to the comm connected network. And the last item that's important is when the mission is done, you have the capacity to do that zero standing privilege, ZSP, removal of access when you're actually done with that flow. So I got time. There we go. There we go. We'll see a quick flow. Oh, I think I ran into this. Stand by. There. See if I can move this over. Windows P. Duplicate. There we go. Perfect. It's running in action. This is great. So stand by. So what you can see here, it failed. Not it failed. That's not what happened, right? That behaved actually as expected. The reason is because the user didn't exist. We didn't want the user to have access, right? They weren't created yet, and we expect that. But in this particular case, the user has then actually been automatically provisioned at this point. It knows to go because it's connected, knows to go to Entra ID for authentication. Entra ID, as you may be familiar, has CBA or the certificate-based authentication. And then from that perspective, it now has the ability to get authenticated. You can see it's logging with a particular user CLI. And what will happen is from the login perspective, it's going to take that user CLI and then apply that to the application. And so once that application receives that user, it'll match it up to the local on-site resources and then deliver it so that you're going to get exactly that profile that's provisioned not but 2 or 3 minutes ago, if that's when the mission assets arrived. So you're going to get mission assets tied to the application as applicable. If you take a few moments to forward a little bit farther, I'll kind of skip so we have less waiting here. You'll actually see a change here, right? You'll see a disconnect into connected. We're flipping that over. So it's going from connected to disconnected, and you're going to expect to see a different user experience. And the change is because we no longer are connected to comms. Yes, can't get to Entra ID, but we're going to access that capability of provision in just a few minutes for us. You're actually seeing now going back to the same application. The application is reaching out, is hitting that Strata component, which is an orchestration. It knows to point it to the local authentication, KeyCloak in this particular case. The other key thing to note is because we provisioned it at that time the user came in, it actually has that exact same profile. So the user doesn't have to use a different kind of login, uses that same login that we typed in just a second ago, CLI Strata eval, and then we'll put in the password from that perspective. And then once this comes in, it'll actually rotate and then get back to the same application. And then once this completes, the last part you'll see on the video if you want to come back and finish it here in a few minutes at a later time. Once it's done, you can actually take the user out with one click disable, and everything's done. And you can move on to the next mission, ship the hard rock out, and you're ready to go. I'm going to go back here, and I think we're about done. So the last part, have I got 1 minute? Okay. There we go. So that's really kind of the end of where we got to. Hopefully you can see that screen. I'm trying to get it bigger. Slideshow. There we go. So that's kind of the end of the presentation so far. If you do have questions, I think I might have a minute for one question possibly. But we are at booth 707. If you have any questions, you can come back there. You can ask me after. We got a question. The man in the blue shirt.
There you go.
I gotta wait for the...
What are all the companies that are developed with that are involved with the development of this solution?
Oh, great question. So this is a ready-to-go, and I should have mentioned this was a ready-to-go from COTS products. This isn't an R&D effort. So this is using Savient for provisioning, using Microsoft for a bunch of the authentication, and then using Strata for the orchestration. So those were those logos that you saw up there. So thank you. Great question.
Real quick, how long does the authentication sit and persist in a disconnected state?
That's a good question, and then the answer fundamentally comes down to two issues. One is the session timeouts, but it happens in two places. One will be a session timeout that will occur via the IDP, which is policy, and then it's a session timeout that is tied to whatever your application is. So SharePoint, if you have a SharePoint session timeout that's set for, because it'll hand the session off to SharePoint, if it's set up for 5 days, then it's going to have a 5-day timeout, right? So now, that being said, there are capabilities within a single sign-on world to have a concept of single logout. So when you click the button, it's all gone, right? I would say also that you can call those things via API. So if we came out and said, hey, there's a cyber threat and it's time to zero trust, it's entirely conceivable. You could write an API call to the SLO endpoint, log out any sessions, and then close out any authorizations at the same time. So definitely possible. It's kind of reading between the tea leaves, but I'm not sure. So great question. Thank you. Good on time? Okay. Well, if any questions, happy to take those. If not, we'll be at 707. The content on this QR code has a combination of the videos and also the slides. And I want to thank AFCEA for hosting, and also they're also hosting a copy of the slides on their website for the Augusta as well. So thank you guys.